First of all, thanks for your ability, and also to improve our technology capability for in this lockdown time. As is evident, everybody has to improve better, something more than we are used to do. But I think that there are a lot of things that we can share thanks to the high level of the speaker involved in the webinar today. And I want to thank for sure Mr. Dmitriev for joining us, as well Giorgio Callegari and Francesco Santoro that have been involved in our webinar, thanks to the very reactive confirmation given by Kito Terracciano to be part of our webinar. I think that everybody is more aware about the importance of the relation and the current situation between Russia and the Italian market. And the most important thing that I want to say is that this is only the first of a series of webinars that we want to organize between the different countries in which we are, thanks to the Grimaldi Alliance that we start last year. We are start working in Russia with our friend and colleague Alexander Linnikov, that I think is well placed to provide us with a general review of the current situation of COVID-19 impact in Russian economy. The aim is also in the lockdown time to put people together in order to work in this new scenario in which everybody is facing new challenge. But what is important is to be aware that generally saying the needs of trusted cooperation between professional undertaking and people generally is growing in this time. And the aim of this first webinar is to start having a common platform to exchange view information and to have a close cooperation between people working in between Russia and Italy. I don't have to add more than that, and I want to leave the floor waiting that Francesca is joining us. Great. So I think that we can start with her if technology allowed to do it, because she has some time constraints. So I think that we can start with Francesca's intervention to open the discussion and to understand a little bit better, which is the perception that from your specific position you can provide us about the current situation between Russia and Italy. Please, Francesca.
Thank you very much, Francesco. Thank you, everybody. My name is Francesca Santoro. I'm the head of the Economic and Trade Department of the Italian Embassy in Moscow. I will try to very briefly, I promise I'll be short, give you an overview of the economic relation between Russia and Italy, taking into account the effects of the pandemic crisis. Italy and Russia have long-standing and excellent relations, both from an economic but also on a diplomatic and cultural point of view. Italy was one of the first countries to recognize the then Soviet Union in 1924. And first, the Italian companies were among the first to enter the Soviet Union market back in the 60s. Companies like Fiat or Pirelli were among the pioneers in those times, entering the Russian market. So the relation, it's not only excellent, but is also long-standing. And also today, Italy, which is strongly committed to its Western alliances to NATO and to European Union, is still a supporter of a dialogue with Russia, an inclusive dialogue with Russia. So our economic relations are also founded on the complementarity between the two economic systems. Russia is a country which has incredible raw materials, not just hydrocarbons, but also wood, leather, minerals, which are very important for the Italian manufacturing industry. And Russia and Italy is actually, it was actually in 2019, because this year it's 2020, it's going to be completely different, was the 7th buyer of Russian products in the world. And it's the 5th exporter in Russia. Russians buy, well, actually, one of the reasons why our relations is so strong, it's also that Russia has a very good knowledge of Italy, loves its culture, loves everything that has to do with Italian, and appreciates everything that has to do with Italian lifestyle. So we sell all the iconic products of Italian lifestyle in Russia: wine, food, design, and fashion. But our first export to Russia is manufacture, so machinery, because which is quite needed from Russian industry. They recognize the excellence of the Italian know-how, and so this is the first voice of our export. And the importance of this leads me to another very important topic, which is the change this is undergoing since the crisis of 2014 in the Russian economy. A complex process of modernization of Russian economy, of relaunch of its manufacturing system, and a program of import substitution and weaning the economy from hydrocarbon dependence, which was actually a very, as you may see now, a very wise choice. And Italian companies have a huge role to play in this respect, because the excellence of our know-how, of our machinery, it's quite renowned. So there is a large field of opportunity for Italian companies willing to invest in Russia, importing know-how to Russia. There is, I think this is something very interesting that it's happening in the Russian market. Was happening in 2019, but I don't think it won't stop in the long run, pandemic notwithstanding. So, as you usually say, it's time to stop an economic relation model based just on made in Italy, so on export and commercial relation, and start to get into made with Italy in Russia model. So to develop also an industrial partnership as well as a commercial one. There are many large companies that are already present in Russia. There are success stories from Pirelli to Barilla to Cremonini Group or Ferrero, just to mention some, but there are many others. There are almost 100 Italian companies which produce in Russia. But I do think that there is really room for many more. Many exporters are worried that this might impact the Italian domestic production, and that it might cause a problem with Italian soundings and counterfeition of goods of not really clear Italian origin. But I don't think this is a problem in Russia, because I do think that Russian consumers are know so well the Italian excellency that they will always be ready to recognize the Italian top quality products. There will always be room in Russia, on the Russian market, for the Italian excellency products. But there is a lot of things that we can produce together in Russia, and that it does not sense to import from the European Union. That's not going to happen. And so it's better if Italian companies just seize the opportunity and become producer together with Russian partners in Russia. Well, that was a little bit the picture of what was happening until January. Then, as you all know, things changed dramatically. The pandemic reached Russia, although a little bit later than other European countries. Numbers are on the rise. We are still far from hitting the plateau. So we are getting, so Russia is getting prepared, and it's facing with, it's earnestly facing the situation. There have been 3 speeches of the president to the general public, which it's really demonstrate how seriously this crisis has been taken. But the impact of the crisis, it's not easy to measure. There have been reassurance that no company will be left behind and that the state and the government will grant support to companies which are affected from the economic crisis, from the economic effects of the pandemic. There's going to be support both on a governmental level and on a local level. Russia, it's incredibly huge country. There are 83 federal entities. Obviously, there's a lot to be done at a local level, given the substantial difference between the economic system of the different federal subjects. It has been announced that the local budgets will be reinforced to $100 billion, probably. And we are following, as an embassy, we are following with attention what's happening in the regions where the Italian companies are located. And we see a lot of attention, especially for small and medium enterprises. On a governmental level, there will be loans for backbone economic companies, so companies which play a major role in the economic Russian system. I know the government is creating a list of this company, around 1,000 of them, and the nationality of the company is not relevant, which is very important. And I've heard yesterday the president asking the government to study even more measure of support. So they're working on it. Will that be enough? That's a difficult question, and one is not easy really to answer now. The Russian economy in 2020 was off for a good start. The GDP was increasing slightly, but constantly. We were all waiting for the 12 national development plans to kick off in 2020 with positive effects for the growth as a whole. Now, with the COVID striking, what's happening? Consumers are in a lockdown, so we are facing a drop in consume. Major industries are stopping or relenting their production. The hydrocarbon revenues are at an historical minimum level. There is a drop in demand, there is an excess of supply, there is speculations on the market. You have all seen what's been happening recently. So even though Russia is winning its economy just from an hydrocarbon dependency, hydrocarbon revenues play still a very large role on the federal budget. And all this is impacting the ruble, which it's not, just devaluated slightly. Even though we're not facing a 2014 style crisis. But I do think that the fundamental of the Russian economy will hold. This is my not just my personal opinion, but also many analysts' opinion. The Russian central bank has cut interest rate. There is room for loosening fiscal and economic policy because the Russian economy it's strong. It has a low debt to GDP ratio. It has very good reserves, both on gold and value. And there is this national wealth fund where the money from oil and gas goes, which might be used to sustain the budget in the coming 2 to 3 years. So the fundamental are good. The willingness to support the economy and the companies is there. So I think that the Russian economy will be resilient as it was in the past. I think it has learned a lot from the 2008 and 2014 crisis. So I think there is still room for Italian companies interested in the market. Because, in my opinion, in 2020 there will be a drop in the GDP like everywhere. The central bank and the International Monetary Fund both agree on minus 5%. But 2021, there will be definitely, taking everything into account, it's very probable that the GDP will start growing again and pick up speed. There will be a general, I guess, review of the objective of public spending, but the national plans will go on. It's a huge investment project. So I do think there is room for Italian industries, companies interested in the market, both on a commercial and on industrial, on both levels. You hear me?
Perfect.
Yes, because I was not getting any audio more, and I thought that the connection is not very good today. I think it's generally that's all. I mean.
Thank you, Francesca, for your general introduction. It's quite useful because in such a way we can follow with the intervention of Alexander that can allow everybody to have a better understanding of the measure taken by the public authority in order to face COVID-19 impact in Russia, generally say. So in such a way we can have a red line between the intervention before to go to Vladimir, Dmitriev, and also Ernesto Ferlenghi that is joining us. Thank you, Ernesto Ferlenghi, for joining us. And then follow with Giorgio and the other participants. Just to give you an update, we have more or less 70 participants that are joining our webinar. So there is a lot of people hearing us, and to have confirmation of the interest in order to have a good understanding of what is going on between Italy and Russia. Please, Alexander.
Now I'll try to figure out how to show some presentation materials to everyone, but first of all, many thanks to the Grimaldi Alliance and personally my dear friend and colleague Francesco Sciaudone for setting up this conference, which in these difficult days is truly important. I believe that we need to share opinions and start to work on solutions to the problems that we're going to face in the near future together now, without waiting till the end of this difficult isolation period. That said, I suggest that we take a look at the virus pandemic situation in Russia and its economic consequences. So I will try to put some slides on the screen, and you tell me if that works. Okay.
Good.
Virus pandemic situation. Okay. Do you all see that?
Not.
That works. Okay. 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 Now the situation is very dynamic, and these materials were drafted for as of last week when we were preparing for our conference. And as you see in Russia, the situation with the number of virus cases has changed drastically. There are almost twice as many cases this week as there were last week, and the number of fatalities has also grown. Please note that the majority of the cases are registered in the city of Moscow. So we now are practically in the heart of the COVID-19 outbreak, and the city is practically on shutdown. Nationwide, the government has has stopped all automobile, railway, pedestrian, river, whatever traffic between the Russian Federation and other states, and has closed the borders, which is the case in most states of the world these days. With the very few exceptions, the government offices are also closed, and of course, most of the businesses, except for elementary goods stores and pharmacies, are closed as well. Well, what is very important is that the state, the government, actively communicates with the citizens. As of last week, the president has personally addressed the nation 4 times, and he has also spoken to the people on April 25th to announce new measures against coronavirus consequences. So the communication between the people, the businesses, and the authorities works well. There are 2 government bodies that were instituted to overcome coronavirus consequences, which is the operative task force that monitors the day-to-day situation, and the government working group that develops measures to overcome the consequences of the virus in the economic sphere, which is a very important thing to do. Of course, as I said, we're all on the so-called self-isolation. Senior citizens aged over 65 and people suffering of collateral diseases are on outright quarantine, so they're prohibited from exiting their homes except for cases of urgency and necessity. The president has extended the non-working weeks till practically May 12th. On Friday last week, new measures were announced, and next week and the whole period of the May holidays in Russia will continue as a safe isolation period. Speaking of state authorities, what's most important in our profession are, of course, the court system. It's only open for urgent criminal cases. The state bailiff services does not receive citizens, so basically the execution of judgments is suspended. Notaries and attorneys work on need-to-work basis. We are authorized to circulate in the city and arrive on call in case our professional assistance is needed. What's very frustrating is that real estate registration is suspended and the state registers are closed. But that is understandable, because for registration of rights to real estate, originals of documents have to be presented, and there's no way to submit them online. Now let's say a few words about supportive business measures introduced by the state. There's no way to, of course, what's been of most interest to our European colleagues is the initiative to supportive business measures to reduce the amounts of mandatory contributions to the pension fund, social security fund, and mandatory medical insurance. The rates have been reduced from the total rate of contributions has been reduced from 30 to 15%. There is a drastic measure that allows businesses to retain their employees and also encourages to pay higher salaries, because this reduction applies only to salaries above minimum wage. So it applies to salaries above 12.5 thousand rubles per month. And this measure, as the president said last Friday, will not be temporary. It will become it will be applied indefinitely, which is supposed to encourage businesses to retain and hire new employees, highly paid employees. The Bank of Russia has lowered its key rate, and the state banks are encouraged to stimulate lending to small and medium enterprises. So the state effectively will subsidize all loans at a rate above of 8.5% per year. There will be no tax audits and inspections of businesses till May 31. So all current and extraordinary audits and inspections by the state authorities are suspended, and we expect this measure to be extended throughout the year 2020 and maybe beyond. And of course, all claims for bankruptcy have been suspended. So the courts are not authorized to accept new statements of claims for bankruptcy for the next 6 months. State assistance is of course provided to the industries that have suffered most because of the shutdown. As you see, the list is most logical, because the industries that have suffered most are transportation, culture, sports, anything that has to do with movement or gathering of people, and also retail, trade, and basic household services, which constitute the majority of small and medium enterprises in Russia, have taken a heavy hit. So measures of state support will be provided, including, of course, as I said, the moratorium on initiating bankruptcy cases, a significant shift in deadlines for paying taxes that, however, do not apply to the value-added tax, which constitutes the most of the tax burden of small and medium enterprises, and the government has been criticized for this half measure that does not regard value-added tax, which we believe is the heaviest part of the tax burden. In order to compensate for state funds that are temporarily fall out of the budget, the government has introduced also tax increases for individuals, and the personal income tax will now apply to interest on deposits. And last Friday, the president has also announced that standard tax rates will be applied to dividends and interest directed outside of Russia. So anything, any personal income leaving the Russian Federation will be now taxed on general basis with no exclusions and no adjuvelations. Although all these taxes will become payable in 2022, they will come into force as of January 2021, and of course the banks foresee a significant drawback in substantial deposits. Just this morning, the Sberbank analysts announced two conclusions. The first one is that the peak of the epidemic in Russia will probably be reached in mid-May, meaning in 2 or 3 weeks, and that means that before that the people will continue drawing their funds back from the banks. And second conclusion of the Sberbank analysts is that the resource base of state and private banks will be reduced by those willing to retrieve their deposits before the new tax comes into force. Although these deposits are not very big per se, it's roughly 12,000 euros per person, but in Russia, only 1% of depositors are fortunate enough to have that kind of money, and there are different estimates as to how much out of the total deposit amounts in the Russian banking system that what is the fraction of those deposits in the total resource base of Russian banks, and the estimate is that it's somewhere between 7 and 10%. So there is a possibility that the banking system, because of these new measures introduced by the government, may take yet another hit. There's one other significant implication of the coronavirus pandemic. Recently, there's been a lot of speculation about the possibility of lifting of international sanctions of Russia, and we hope that this difficult situation in the world will actually influence the thinking of European politicians and make it clear that Russia is more valuable as a partner and as a friend than as a political rival, because we all understand that the sanctions may not make no sense and hurt the economy more than they help achieve political goals. So thanks to everyone. I hope you've seen and heard what I was saying, because for technical reasons I have trouble hearing you. And I'm of course open to all and any questions that you might have. What I was saying.
Thank you, Alex.
Because for technical reasons I have trouble hearing you. And I'm of course open to all and any questions that you might have. What I was saying. Because for technical reasons I have trouble hearing you. And I'm of course open to all and any questions that you might have. What I was saying. course, open to all and any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Alex. We have your presentation, and for sure everybody is allowed to have a question chat through the chat available on the life-size system. So if there is any question from the attendees, please chat it, and we'll share it with our speakers. Zap. So now is the time for the presentation of the intervention, let me say, of Mr. Dmitriev, that I will be happy to hear, also to have his view, considering the specific observations that he can have, and to understand a little bit better which is the perception of the economic environment, of the impact given by the COVID-19 during the last week, and which is the expected impact in coming months. And for sure, the Chamber of Commerce is, and the Russian-Italian Forum Dialogue that are chaired by Mr. Dmitriev are the right forum to understand a little bit better, which is the expectation of the impact of the COVID-19 that follow also the measure taken by the government as anticipated by Alexander Linnikov before. Please, Mr. Dmitriev.
I'll make a short presentation in my two capacities as Vice President of the Chamber of Commerce and Industries on one hand, and as a co-chair of, from the Russian side, of Russian-Italian Forum Dialogue of Civil Societies. Alexander Linnikov outlined generally and in more details how the crisis impacted Russian economy and what sort of measures are undertaken by our government. From my perspective as the Vice President of the Chamber of Commerce and Industries, I would like to say that it is very difficult to predict and to say now about how long the crisis will be. And there are actually several scenarios. Most of them are based on the nature and structure of Russian economy, which is very much dependent on oil and gas and raw materials export. And since prices drop dramatically, the dependence on how fast the recovery of market happens will influence, of course, which of these optimistic, realistic, and more dramatic scenarios will be realized. But what I would like to say is that those measures which are undertaken by the government and a new package, the third package of assisting measures towards Russian economy and particular enterprises are under preparation. All those measures are undertaken and designed by the government with the very close intervention and very close cooperation with unions of Russian entrepreneurs. There are actually 4 major unions which unite the industrial, agricultural, and other sectors of economy of the Russian Federation. And Chamber of Commerce and Industries is one of these 4 major unions which cooperate with Russian government, which sends requests and proposals from the business society. And fortunately, almost all of our suggestions were accepted by the government, and we see that in those plans which are under implementation and which are under discussions, almost all of our suggestions are included. Another thing which I want to emphasize is that, as well as in other countries, the major impact by the crisis reflected or affected small and medium enterprises. And for me, as the co-chairman of Russian-Italian Forum Dialogue of Civil Societies, it's very important, and it's of huge importance that we jointly try to improve situation of economic situation of small and medium enterprises as soon as borders are open, as soon as restrictions are lifted, and as soon as we come back to the normal economic life. Because civil society is an integral part of, because small and medium enterprises is integral part of each civil society, if not the major part of civil society. And of course, small and medium enterprises and medium class is the backbone of each society generally in each country. That's why for me and for my friend Ernesto, it's very important that we jointly elaborate measures to very soon improve situation, and probably this situation, this crisis creates additional opportunity for us, for Italian and Russian business, for our civil societies, for our politicians to come back and to, in the end of the day, realize the idea of creating investment fund which will be directed to finance particular projects of small and medium enterprises in Russia and in Italy. Another issue which I would like to emphasize is, of course, the perception that, or several perceptions which are generated by this crisis. One of them is that the lessons of the crisis will urge countries and governments to look more thoroughly at the globalization. Because globalization, which and the crisis and the pandemic crisis showed it, it impacted very much on the speed of spread of virus worldwide. And of course, we see a very strong intentions for isolation. But to overcome crisis and to overcome consequences of the crisis, I think, and I presume that the major of analysts back this idea that we have to overcome this crisis jointly. We have to realize that only with joint efforts we can do that. And with this respect, the efforts and strong efforts of our civil societies will, in my mind, and should play a very important role in the efforts of the governments to soon and strongly overcome the crisis and to come back to the normal life, both economic and social. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your intervention. Please, now I want to leave the floor to Mr. Ferlenghi to complete this first round of intervention and a better understanding of the perception of the entrepreneurial side of the impact of COVID-19. Please.
Thank you very much, all of you. Good morning. Hope you see my presentation on the screen. Is okay?
It's perfect.
Wonderful. So thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Francesco Sciaudone, for support and inviting us. Thank you. Special thanks to our my friend Vladimir Alexandrovich Dmitriev, co-chairman. We both together, we co-chaired our Italian Forum of a Dialogue. I see there, and special thanks also to Alexander Dmitriev, Yakovenko, the ambassador and professor. Of course, hello to Francesca Santoro of Italian Embassy, Giorgio Callegari, my colleagues, and Alexander Linnikov. Hope, of course, that everybody, you and your family are safe. So thank you very much. Going to the first slide, coronavirus in numbers. What is going to happen? What's happened already? Of course, everybody already know what's happening in the world, the number, the figures that has been presented by all the state authority, by the agency. Good, positive, I think, thanks God for Russia. If you highlight the results for Russia, you see the number of positive tested and infected has been increasing, of course, but still the numbers of reported deaths is very low. So this is very good news for Russia, for some measure that has been taken probably during the last few months. And of course, the number, of course, is very high in terms of representation from Moscow and the Moscow region and St. Petersburg. If you go on the second slide, the pandemic impact economic growth worldwide, I try to summarize which was the impact on the GDP decline in the forecast 2020 and 2021. Of course, at the world level, we have some figures which coming from the International Monetary Fund. You see the -3%, which is the global forecast recession for the level of the worldwide. Of course, if you compare what's happening in 2008, 2009, which was purely financial crisis, which is not comparable with the ones that we are now facing now. I mean, that one was more financial crisis, the worst, of course, since the Great Depression, but still is not comparable with the one they are now living, because we have now a very, destruction of supply chain. We have sharp decline of industrial activity. And the first question is that we have no capability so far when the world economy is going to be recovering. And so what we are facing now is the so-called L shape. So we know that the economy going down to the level that we know now, and is represented in the slides, but still we are not able to see any recovery from the economy point of view. Russia, you see, expected 5.5 minus 5.5 GDP contraction for 2020, while the analysts foreseen a kind of recovery in the 2021, but still that level will depend mainly from the oil price, of course, and we will see later on why. GDP losses in 2021 will be very high. I see in at the world level to 9 trillion, so $9,000 billion. Going to the next slide, the impact economic growth worldwide. I used two different scenarios which has been used by the HIC market. So one is the more baseline scenario, and the other one is the more conservative one. So in the more conservative one, we could be considering the middle. I'm more trusting in the more conservative one. There will be not strong recovery of economy at the GDP level for the 2021. We have to expect a bit later phase. But if you go to the second slide, which is probably most important and sensitive for Russia, is the figures which represent how the Brent and the oil price and the gas price has been decreased during the last months. What means that you have an effect which is a combined effect of two, three different conditions. The geopolitical tension that you see, well known, the tension between Saudi Arabia, Russia, USA on the cutting of the production oil. Of course, the turmoil on the oil market, and of course the COVID-19 effect. All the three effects are working the same in the same direction. So pressing on the economy of all the countries in the world. Of course, that seems to be a case that will be for a long time studied as a case in all the university. I'm sure about that. But if you concentrate on the last slide, of course, we have to understand that already the day after tomorrow, the new OPEC Plus deal, which will be taking place as a result of the agreement between the Saudi Arabia and Russia, of course, will be a cut production of oil by 17% for Russia. And of course, it means that will be a reduction, a considerable reduction of income in the budget, of the federal budget. Of course, will be produce a cutting in the investment plan of the oil companies at the worldwide already for the 2020. On average, the cutting of investment is in the level of 30%, and the 35% will be the forecast for 2021. So it means global cutting of investment in amount of $80 billion. It means that if you consider even the breakdown, the break-even of the oil price for Russia, of course, we have to expect that the budget losses of Russian Federation will be until end of the year in the average of between 75 and $100 billion lack of income. The measure that we saw, I mean, quite important measure, specifically, or not only for the business, but even for the social part, of course, of the people. So the support are in the measure of 3%, 3.3 probably GDP of the Russian GDP. And of course, there will be a contribution which should be given by the stabilization fund. But still, that fund, the $500 billion available in the fund, if the economy will not be recovered so far very fast, and will be completely utilized until the end of this year. So this is very important to think that something has been accumulated during the high oil price during the last 4 years, 5 years, can be really utilized in a few months. That's very important to keep in mind. So I try to understand. I mean, everybody. Let's figure that on the next slide how self-isolation affected the various sector. It's very, very simple and very similar to what's happened in the other countries in the world. Of course, we see on the green is the winner, the sector which are keeping and increasing the turnover, while on the red and yellow is the ones that are losing money. And of course, you see what's happening. If you take only Italy, for example, as an example, I do not represent here, but we have 12% of the GDP is only the voice which belong to the tourism. So can you imagine 1 year losses of tourism could be in the range of between 180 and 200 billion euro. Can you imagine the dramatic impact on the economy? EU measure support, that is very important because that has an impact which will be, I mean, and the economy recovery, nobody can now predict when that will be, nobody can predict when can be a recovery until the vaccine will be found out. Somebody of the analysts are saying that the vaccine will be available probably in 1 year. Still, that should be a joint private state joint effort, because that will be a long-term strategy and a big amount of investment to foresee. More than $1 billion needed for discover the new vaccine. That's very important. That's the crisis of demand, of course. Nobody can predict what's happened, but still the European Union did really a great job. I mean, they really put in available 3.3 trillion, which is 18% of the GDP, of the EU GDP. That's very important things. Supporting Italy. Italy, as you know, we will see a little bit later what they was trying to propose to European Union. Of course, that extremely important the measure adopted by the European Union, also from political point of view. That is political strong signal for the strength of Europe is needed now, of course. And you see the package that is going to be potentially available for all the member countries. You see the so-called MES loan, the European Stability Mechanism, the system from the European Investment Bank, and the work support measure. Of course, some of them will be recovery funds based on the specific condition that is going to be negotiated, and the other is not potentially not repayable loans. On the anti-crisis measure of different countries, you see USA even adopted a very strong effort in order to support the country. As you see, 12% of the GDP, which is somewhere 2.7 trillion of dollars. That's a very strong, probably the largest anti-crisis program of the world. You see down the France, you see UK, Germany, and go back to the, moving forward. This is support measure for work in different countries. Try to represent, of course, the well-known social on the north of Europe, support given by some country like Sweden, Denmark. You see France there. So different approach, different sensibility, but still everybody are looking to the social impact of this crisis. Italy liquidity decrease. Government is doing very good, strong effort in order to support all the companies. Of course, as you know, more than 90% of Italian companies are mainly small and medium. So that's one that are mainly suffering from the financial support. They have to be supported, otherwise they are not being ready to support and be ready to be competitive with in the moment when you'll be ready to be, the economy will be recovering. And of course, competence there, but still money is needed. So the guarantee level that has been given by the government decrease depends on the turnover of the company, of course, but still we see a very proactive approach by the government. We talk, and probably you read on the newspaper about the using the so-called the golden share. So we have to look at the to protect the strategic Italian company from potential M&A. This is time when everybody are looking to M&A potential acquisition and selling. It's very important, that measure. The e-commerce and coronavirus to be shortly, something very growing all the world for the Russia is one of the very important key part of the new strategy. As you see, turnover for the e-commerce is more than 30 billion. Of course, as I said at the beginning, there is problem with the disruption of the supply chain. It is very important to be recovered as short as possible. Growth in terms of sales for e-commerce, I try to compare different countries in the world, what means in terms of figures. You see in the slides on the top on the left side, and which are the product that has been at the top ranking of the e-commerce consumer sales. Long-term trends try to represent here, which is the important relevant weakness in global supply. As I said, it has to be adapted to the new methodology. Of course, we are always, Italy has been always in favor of the Russian strategy, industrial strategy of localization. So we understand how important it is to create value and the creation of a joint venture production together here. The model that has been everybody already adopted to do business with Italy in Russia together with the Russian Italian company. We have many companies, not really Italian companies are still there. We're suffering, of course, from different aspects of the sanction effect, of course, and now we have to get on this another challenging period of time, of course. We see how this is the future. Nobody can predict, of course, but we have to strongly be confident that we'll be recovered. Timing, in my mind, will be quite challenging time for a few years. Nobody of the analysts can really consider that 2021 will be the year of recovering. So we have to understand that probably needs time. For Russia, as we said, we have to look at the oil Brent price because they have a tremendous impact of more than 40% of the internal of the federal budget. So thank you very much. That's all from my side.
Thank you, Mr. Ferlenghi, for your general overview, also related to Italy intervention and EU intervention to face COVID. One of the questions that I will be happy to raise to your for later intervention is to understand which is the feeling that as Confindustria you have about the effectiveness of the national measure raised in different countries, because one of the most important things I think is to understand the impact of all these measures, the timing, because the amount for sure are higher, is expected to grow also in coming months. But what is of essence, in my opinion, is the timing and effectiveness of all these measures. Because we have seen also at EU level the differences between the timing and intervention of different countries is very important in terms of notification from a state aid point of view, availability for money for undertaking, simplified procedure to have access to financing, and so on. So one of the questions that I would be happy to raise to your attention is in this one. But before to leave the answer to everybody, I'm asking to Giorgio Callegari if he's available to have his intervention and to have his very important views as CEO of Generali in Russia. And first, more than this, it's a top manager, very well aware about the difficulties of undertaking on the market.
Thanks a lot, Francesco. Thanks for the introduction. Congratulations to all the colleagues that have spoken before me for their very interesting presentations, and happy to offer my point of view. I just reread again the title of the conference that you have so kindly organized, and I believe it is very focused, as everything that you tend to do. So well done. In particular, I think that we should address issues and opportunities. Okay, so rather than offering my view on statistics and current level of contamination, I think that I would probably be of interest to the audience if I share my point of view on the issues and opportunities. So the first issue that I see is the one that you just highlighted. So the fact that governments are taking very different approaches to identifying means and level of support to the various industries affected by the virus. So you have governments focusing on some industries, governments focusing on protecting jobs, governments offering loans, governments offering outright cash handouts, and at very different levels. I mean, obviously, the industry that I know better because I worked in it for 25 years is aviation. And if you look at aviation, you have companies like Lufthansa seeking 12 billion euros, companies like Air France receiving already 7 billion euros, and companies like Alitalia fighting to receive 500 billion euros. So you have a situation where national economies that certainly depend on connectivity, as it was said very clearly by all the speakers before me, that will have a very, very different set of transportation means based on what the government decide in terms of prioritizing their allocation of remedial measures. So the first issue I see is not the fact that governments are not ready to support their economies, but the fact that there is a complete divergence between all the relevant governments in terms of prioritization and size of the support. And that is further compounded as a second issue, in my opinion, by the completely different set of rules adopted to open up the economy. So we have, for instance, Volkswagen that is already starting production of Golf, certainly not at the level that it was before, but therefore, again, manufacturing cars and in the expectation to be able to sell them, and other companies in other European markets and even in Russia that are not in the same condition. So you have not only a competitive distortion resulting from the different measures of support, but you have a competitive distortion, at least misalignment, let me use a more moderate definition, resulting from different regulations to open up the market. So those, in my opinion, are the main two issues. The third issue resulting from those two issues, the fact that there doesn't seem to be a true effort, in my opinion, to try and coordinate the access to the markets and the evolution of, or rather the evolution, the reinstatement of production levels, at least between countries that are and have been for a long time close partners. In that respect, I think that the statistics provided by Francesco Santoro are crucial in understanding the quality and the depth of the relationship between Russia and Italy. It's an historic and very important relationship, but even in that, we have a completely different approach to which products will be allowed, at which time, with which constraints, and so on. Therefore, if we agree on the fact that those are the issues, then the opportunity is very clear, and it's an opportunity that Vladimir Dmitriev clearly identified. So the need to improve dialogue, to focus on a dialogue that facilitates a better understanding, and through a better understanding, a more effective alignment of progress towards the new world. I refuse to call it the new normal, as a number of say experts are already doing, because we don't know what the normal will be. We only know that it will be something different from what we have, and therefore it will be crucial, in my opinion, to build that something through as much dialogue as we can. Because otherwise, what we're already seeing is closed borders, closed access to supporting measures, however well-intended they are, and therefore competitive disruption. In that respect, you, Francesco, I believe, are in a unique position, based on your experience in Brussels, to share with us how you believe that the European Commission will look at mergers, will look at transnational mergers, will look at the evolution of competitive regulations, and how that could affect the relationship between Europe and such an important partner like Russia. Last but not least, as you kindly invited me as a representative of Generali, I would like to say that we still believe in the potential of the market. So that's an important message we would like to share, in particular with the audience. So I've heard, unfortunately, a number of times, too many times, people talking about a V-shaped curve. So the economy will rebound very quickly. Trump said it, they want the US up and running by Easter. Somebody else was even more aggressive, and we all know how that ends. That was said after 9/11, that was said after 97, that was said after SARS, that was said after every relevant global crisis. And everything, every time it was an L-shaped curve at best. And in some cases it was a flat GDP for a number of years before positive signs would emerge. Ask Japan in that respect. They're still trying to recover from the real estate bubble of the mid-90s. So what do I mean by that? I mean that we have to adapt to completely different economic environment. And in that respect, again, we believe that generally Russia presents more opportunities than others. So to summarize, the issues are very clear, and I could offer one word to describe the issues, which is misalignment, increasing misalignment, and therefore increasing challenge to constructive dialogue. Opportunities, focus on building that dialogue, focus on markets with solid economics. And again, as it was said by some of the speakers, Russia enters this crisis in better conditions than others, and identify opportunities for investment, which I believe are still there. Thank you so much.
Giorgio, thank you very much. because you rightly focus the attention on next steps. That is the crucial matter that you have to face, because as someone told me, the next forecast is not to be done in comparison with the last one, but as the first one for the company. And the second, the 21, is to be compared not with 19, but with the 20 for turnover, like the first one done by the company. So we have to understand that there is a turning point in the economy, and perhaps the right approach is to be, as I'm used to be, optimistic, because even if there is a decrease of 10%, or I don't know how much will be in GDPR, the important is that we remain with the other 19. So we are only losing 10% perhaps in Italy. I don't know which is the expectation in Russia, or generally saying. But what is important is the other part of the GDP that remain important as well, and the economy is continuing to move. And what is of interest, and I want to share with this general information, because I leave the floor to the Ambassador Yakovenko in order to have his very important overview, thanks to the experience already done in the UK and as my Minister for Foreign Affairs, to have the Russian perspective, perhaps better than others. I want to share with you how different is the intervention taken by the European country on state aid matters, because it's of interest, because I allow everybody to have a good understanding and try to use the technology. So please be patient with me.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this meeting. From my point of view, it's very important and timely. And I just want to refer on the last issue, which was mentioned, the issues and opportunities. If you look at the global picture of how the countries reacted on pandemic, you will find that starting from the beginning, all of them, all the world reacted on the bilateral basis. On the, let's say, on the national basis. If you take, for example, Italy, Italy was struggling with the pandemic, especially at the beginning, almost alone. If you take, for example, us, we mostly rely on our own capabilities, and everything what is done on a national level. It means that when the country is ready for pandemics, it could be successful. If not, actually it's not so easy to organize the international support. If you look at the Americans, you will find that they are struggling with this issue alone, and are basically concentrating on themselves. It's the only exception could be probably the bilateral cooperation. And what we have today with Italy is a good example how we can cope with that. And we also did a lot of things with the other countries. So what I want to say that bilateral level was the key level of cooperation from the international point of view. This is first. Second, if you look at the forecast, you will find that most of the Europe and of course Russia, we will have the plateau sometime in May. And there will be slowdown of the pandemic during the summer. So by September, more or less the situation will be clear, and this will definitely help the economic relations and the economic situation in the European countries and also in Russia. We have enough strength to support the economy. And I'm happy that Francesca said that Italy is still interested in international, in cooperation with Russia in economic sphere. That is very good. But what I wanted to say, not just to repeat what was said with the other speakers, I'm thinking that on the bilateral basis, there is a great deal of new opportunities for cooperation. And I'll just give you one or two examples. The first one, Russia will take a lead on the BRICS countries. This is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, on the developing the vaccine, and also on the developing new technologies of the antivirus medicine. And so we're going to invest a lot of money. But what is important, we're so since Russia is going to take a lead on the BRICS, and we have an experienced country like China in this organization, I think there is a great opportunity for us with the Italian experience of the coronavirus to think of the some kind of a let's say additional cooperation in this area, because it's not going fade away in a few months, and everything what will be done together have a good opportunities. So Russia, Italy could do something in this area. The other thing from my point of view, because all of us will be struggling with the repairing of the economy on the bilateral basis, or not the bilateral, but on the national basis. So the more cooperation you have, the more things you can do together with the other countries, the better will be for the economy. So the second question is, of course, the green economy. So far, we don't have anything. I mean, we don't have substantial things with Italy on that matter, but Green Deal 2050 is a very serious one. So I think what we can make the list of the technologies that will be important for this, let's say, green future, on which we can work together. I think this will be beneficial for both countries. The other thing, and Francesca mentioned this, the agriculture. We're about to adopt the green standards in Russia. This will be the new legislation, which will bring our agriculture to the absolutely new level. It's not organic level, but this will be the green level, green standard. And that's another area where we could work together to set up standards in the world from the point of view of the green agriculture. So what I want to say is we have certain areas where we could make plans and where we could do something together, and this will be for the benefit of the economy of Russia and Italy. What I would suggest, maybe on the side of our dialogue, if we could prepare the list of possible new areas of cooperation, which we could present to our governments. That could be 5, 6 areas, but this is the areas where we never cooperated before, as I said, green technologies, vaccination, some other things. And this could be the impact to the future of our countries for at least the next 3-5 years. And this has a very practical part of it. And this is the real thing that could be done together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that your approach is very pragmatic and to be followed, because it is in the sense of focusing the attention and the capability as well as resources in order to don't lose the opportunity raising out from the crisis. That's one of the most important thing to be aware of it, because as I was sharing with you, just to focus the attention about the EU approach, the different approach taken by the national economy, you can see how different is the amount of the money put in the economy by the European member state, and how important it is to focus and to avoid the risk that the competition between the different national economic regime will be used by a number of countries thanks to the higher economic capability of Germany, for example. Because one of the most important matter to be managed actually at EU level is exactly the one that had been mentioned before by Giorgio Callegari. There is a suspension of the prohibition rule, there is a temporary framework for state aids. That means that a higher public intervention in the economy is possible, as mentioned before. And for sure, what is expected is a completely new level playing field in coming years. This is of essence in order to understand which are the priorities that have to be followed by a country like Italy, for example, not only at the national level, but specifically at EU level, because there will be competition between the member states, higher competition between the member states, and there will be as well the necessity of bilateral relations stronger than before, like the one that you mentioned with Russia, for example. So it's a very different scenario, the one that we have that we can expect. In terms of impact of public policy and economic support, in terms of higher competition between national regime, and this has to be taken in mind, because if we believe that we continue to work as done before, so business as usual, there will be bad surprise for everybody. Because the scenario that we are facing actually is characterized by a stronger public intervention. Does mean that how stronger you are, publicly saying, how potentially bigger you remain on the market in coming months and year. So it's of essence to develop bilateral dialogue and to focus, to prioritize the public intervention in the economy. The sector that have been mentioned by Giorgio before, let me go back on aviation, is a very clear example on how things can work. There will be perhaps one or two aviation company having a role in the European market, and not only, and the other remain less than regional, if they remain on the market. So the same is for airport, the same is for energy sector, for example, for transport, not to be obliged, as well other very, very significant economic sector like the financial one, because you know better than me that the decision taken by the different government is also relevant for the different approach taken by the financial sector to support real economy. The Italian example is in the sense of a high level involvement of the financial sector in the supporting of real economy through the utilization of the debt intervention approach. Different countries have taken the different approach to direct contribution to the undertaking in crisis. So all these elements have to be taken in mind in order to organize the better the cooperation, the dialogue, as said before, between undertaking stakeholders and to focus the attention on things to be done. But let me go back to one question received by one of our attendees, a colleague representing Enel, is asking which is the phenomenon, and I leave the question to the attention of Alexander Linnikov, the impact of force majeure in Russia, if it's related or not to the pandemic as de facto force majeure in the legal system. Please, Alex.
Yeah, thank you, Francesco. This is a very, very good question that refers to one of the major challenges that we're going to face in the days to come after the isolation is over. As you all know, at this time, the courts only hear a limited number of case categories, that is, arrest petitions and juvenile cases exclusively. But the commercial courts are closed. Once they open, we expect a massive flow of cases that would, where the parties would argue for the right of to justify their non-performance under contracts. And this is where the force majeure circumstances as justifying circumstances come into play, whether the obligation was rightfully non-performed. This will have to be decided by the courts, but at the same time, there is a significant element of doubt, because in Russia the force majeure circumstances are not established by the introduction of the extraordinary state. In order to do that, a government commission has to convene and proclaim the state of emergency in the whole country or in specific regions. But this, as of now, has not happened and probably will not happen. So there are no clear and absolute grounds for the recognition of the pandemic as a force majeure circumstance that would excuse the parties for non-performance. A month ago, at the end of March, when the pandemic was already expected to go wide, the Supreme Court of Russia has issued a decree clarifying some of the issues related to the recognition of force majeure circumstances. Some of the state authorities and large government corporations have followed the guidelines of the Supreme Court. Some of them have effectively gone beyond that. The two notable examples are the Federal Anti-Monopoly Service that explicitly stated in its letter addressed to the public that the pandemic is a force majeure circumstance that can be treated as such for purposes of antitrust compliance. The other example is the Russian railroads that have advised its territorial divisions to treat the pandemic as a force majeure circumstance. So in case disputes will arise between the Russian railroads, its clients, business partners, suppliers, etc., the Russian railroads will depart from the position that the pandemic is a force majeure circumstance, valid grounds for non-performance. The position of the Supreme Court puzzles us legal professionals because it is somewhat elusive, and it leaves to the discretion of the courts to determine whether the pandemic may be treated as a force majeure circumstance in application to specific cases and specific contractual obligations. So it does not it does not recognize the pandemic universally as a force majeure circumstance, but leaves ample space for interpretation. And this is why I started off saying that we expect a significant flow of cases where plaintiffs would insist on the recognition of force majeure circumstances, or defendants for that matter.
Thank you, Alex. I hope that the answer is sufficiently clear to the benefit of Giuseppe Rivera, annual representative that was asking about that. We received another question from Sergei, Laminam representative, on tax question. And I send you the question related to this specific matter. Perhaps you can give a look at the question and provide us with your preliminary answer. But meanwhile, I will be happy to have final remarks from each of you, starting from Francesca, and in order to respect the deadline that we share with you for our webinar, because the use of the webinar as well as the telephone call conference and so on is so huge that at least we have to be respectable for the deadline that we offer to everybody. So we have the last 10 minutes and then we finish the conference. Please, Francesca.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Francesco. Thank to all the participants for their interesting point of view. I think I'd like to close focusing on the opportunities. It's a tough crisis, it's going to be tough times ahead, but I do think there will be opportunities on these markets for the times to come after the worst part of the crisis is over and we'll start opening up markets again. I don't think this is going to be a definitive crisis.
Great, thank you, Francesca. Now I leave the floor to Ernesto Ferlenghi for his final remark. Please.
Yeah, thank you very much. So, of course, as we said, the top priority, of course, is the safety of the people, of course, for everybody. Still, I'm convinced that the business activity has to restart as soon as possible, of course. We rely on internal demand of Italy, of course, and we rely on export capability. As you know, we have 30% of Italian GDP belong to the export, so more than 500 billion euro belong to the export capability that we have. But still, in order to keep our capability to be in competition with the other countries, so our level of competitiveness depends mainly on how we'll be ready to improve our technological level in Italy. So I mean, this is the occasion for us, for Italy, to improve the level of new technology, digitalization process, and mainly investing in the R&D, so research and development. This is the main focus. Our level of investment, private and state-private investment in the R&D is one of the lowest, is 20 billion euros. So we have to improve that. And we have to not forget the environmental issue is one of the most important things. So this is what I want to think. So the Italian family, as you know, has more than 10,000 billion euro capability. So we have to attract that capability of investment for the country, of course, be ready to develop the internal market very, very quickly.
Thank you, Ernesto. So the Ambassador Yakovenko, your final remarks, and then I leave the answer for the question received to Alexander.
I just want to echo the previous statements. I'm quite optimistic about the opening of the markets. This is first. I think there will be some shifts in economy because the coronavirus and everything will put the, it will change a little bit the economic relations. And definitely it will have its own impact on the politics. I cannot say what kind of impact, but definitely the world will be a little bit different. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Alex, so the answer to the question on tax matter received?
Okay. First of all, I must say that I totally agree with the previous speakers that challenges correspond to opportunities, and very often opportunities become even greater than the challenges. So yes, we are all looking forward to the opening of the markets because in the new market we're going to see new products, totally new industries, and totally new approaches to business. So that is really very exciting. As to the question, an entrepreneur has asked us what government benefits are provided to businesses that are not formally recognized as small and medium enterprises, or do not fall into the categories of businesses recognized as impacted by the pandemic. And that is one of the current challenges that we are facing. For example, my firm is an example of that, because as a professional association, we're not even a business. We are a public association based on membership. So there are no, although our business dimensions and turnover are those of a small or medium business, we're not entitled to benefits, tax deductions, and payment terms extensions, things that I've described in my speech. However, the business associations, such as those represented by Mr. Dmitriev, Mr. Yakovenko, Mr. Ferlenghi, invest a great deal of effort into the recognition of specific cases and into convincing the government to implement additional support measures. So my advice to the gentleman that has asked the question is to address the public business associations that gather information on problem cases such as the one that we're discussing, and help will come. To the legal community, for example, the help has come in the person of the Ministry of Justice, with which we usually argue. But the Ministry of Justice, in these difficult circumstances, has supported the attorney community, the professional corporation of notaries, and has suggested to the government to implement support measures for attorneys and notaries, similar to those already existing for small and medium enterprises and the industries impacted by the pandemic. So our advice is very simple: speak and let yourselves be heard by the professional associations. There are people there who are willing to give necessary support.
Thank you, Alexander. So, just a final remarks. I want to say thank you to everybody, because the high level of the speakers allow us to have, in a very short time, a great and deep analysis and overview of the current situation of the COVID-19 impact on Italy and Russia. As Grimaldi, we set up a team dedicated on an international basis to COVID-19. Part of the team is for sure Alexander, in order to follow Russian market, and we provide with invitation to this webinar also an handbook covering the general impact of the COVID-19 in all the countries in which we are with the Grimaldi Alliance. It's only the first one of our webinar, as said at the beginning, and other follows. Perfectly on time. I want to say thank you to everybody for your availability and for your time. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you.